Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to Our Plant Stories, where we dig into the stories that plants tell us about people and places. We're about to take a journey from Italy to America with the fig tree, a tree that was very special to the emigrants who carried cuttings of it, secreted in luggage, sewn into clothes, to grow in their new homes.
They were definitely important to them. And even when my grandfather died and there was no one in his house left to take care of them, my dad brought more to our house. So they were definitely of some importance. I'm not sure where that comes from, or I'm not sure where the fig trees even came from. So, yeah, it would be fascinating to find out.
Now, the reason I've brought you to the corner of this road, near where I live, is that although I hope in this series you'll enjoy the plant stories, I also really hope that you'll be inspired to try growing some of the plants. I didn't know anyone who had a fig tree. Technically, I still don't. But the day after I started to edit this podcast, en route to my nearest underground station, I rounded a familiar corner and suddenly realised that there's a big fig tree here in someone's tiny, and I mean tiny, it's 5 foot wide, front garden. I must have seen it before, but now, well, I'm seeing it in a whole different light. I just have to pluck up the courage to knock on the owner's door. However, I'm getting ahead of the story. Dion Skopatoulou is a friend who lives in San Diego, and this is his plant story. Tell me a little bit about your garden as a child.
So we lived in a pretty urban area outside of Boston. And so the backyard was fairly small. We had a small patch in the back of the house where we had, I want to say one fig tree that came from my grandfather's house. And he had 4 or 5 fig trees. And so my dad took one of his fig trees and put it in our backyard.
How big were the fig trees?
They were small. I would say, I was a kid, so it's hard to know the exact height, but I would say they were probably somewhere around 6 or 7 feet.
Did they get figs off them?
Yeah, we definitely had figs from them. Not every year, though. I remember there were a few years where nothing came. They were still alive, but nothing grew on them, because it was probably the harshest weather that they've ever been in.
Describe winter then in Boston.
It's cold and it can be windy and there can be snow and sleet.
So what happened to the fig tree in winter?
So every fall, my dad would wrap them up at my grandfather's house and at our house. He would wrap them in kind of like what you would wrap a cabinet in if you're moving it. That kind of padding. It looks like a flexible kind of mattress. And he would wrap them in that and then wrap them in burlap and then wrap the burlap in plastic. So it would be like multiple layers. First the big padding, then the burlap, then this plastic. Every fall he'd wrap them. And then in the springtime he would unwrap them. And
was it your dad's job to do the wrapping?
Yeah, it was my dad's job to do everything. We had 6 kids in my family and not one of us helped him that I can remember. So it was all my dad's job. My dad took care of them. Even at my grandfather's house, my dad took care of them. My grandfather was fairly old. So yeah, even over there, he took care of them. He wrapped them up, he unwrapped them, and we would all sit and watch.
Our After this episode, head over to the website, ourplantstories.com, to see a photograph of Dion's dad with his fig tree. Interestingly, there is no picture of the 6 children watching him work. What Dion and I didn't know was that such fig tree stories are shared by many others, and we found the perfect person to explain why. Mary Maniti is passionate about fig trees and the stories of the people who brought them to America. She founded the Italian Garden Project, capturing the stories of the gardening knowledge that those Italian immigrants brought with them. Is it true that if you were to wander around districts of New York, you would be able to spot the Italian areas because of the fig trees?
Absolutely. I can walk around any borough in New York and know exactly where Italians either live currently or where they lived in the past because of the large fig tree or other kinds of fruit trees that would have been distinctly Italian or statuary.
So what's so special about the fig tree that you're seeing it in all those Italian gardens, backyards, yards?
So the fig tree is a revered fruit to Italian Americans. It's something that they had in Italy, and it's something that they often brought with them when they immigrated to this country. It represents so much about the Italian character and the Italian immigrants in particular. It was an edible tree. They weren't about to bring any ornamental tree that couldn't feed you or be productive and be useful, because they came from a lifestyle where they survived on what they could grow. So their mindset was about food and food as survival. So the fig tree in Italy, it could feed you often with 2 crops in the summer, and then it could be dried and feed you all winter long. It was very common in Italy to have a big chest of dried figs that you ate throughout the winter. And so when they came here to America, wanting to be self-reliant, good citizens, and not worry about their food supply like they often had to do in Italy when things got rough, they thought of the fig. We'll bring these fig trees. It can feed us in the summer. It can feed us through the winter. And this is the kind of mentality that they brought with them, focused on food and knowing really what food security was. And also the love of figs. If anyone has ever eaten a warm fig from a tree, they know that taste, I'd never want to leave that taste behind. If I had a choice of bringing that tree with me and having that taste, because especially in the northeast of the US, they weren't going to find figs growing naturally. So that tree really represents who the immigrants were. They brought these trees that weren't able to be, or normally able to be grown in the northeast, but because of their knowledge of the land, because of their agriculture backgrounds, they figured out how to grow these trees in an inhospitable climate, and they got them to grow. And now so many of the children and grandchildren of those immigrants identify their Italian immigrant ancestry with those trees, and they proudly identify it. They remember that loved one and their love of that tree. So now a lot of people now want to recreate that and grow their own fig tree, even in the Northeast where it's not easy to grow.
There is a big population of Italian Americans in San Diego, but I don't, because it's like a coastal desert climate. It's not easy to grow a lot of food here. I mean, the soil is kind of really unforgiving, so you don't get a lot of what you think of California. You think of lots of fruit trees, and that doesn't really happen down this far. Just because it really is a desert.
Okay, so let's talk about your childhoods. Mary, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. That's where my grandfather immigrated when he came in the early 1900s. And he came from Sant'Angelo d'Alife in the province of Caserta in the region of Campania, Italy. And he came in 1912, just at 16 years old. He was the oldest of 5 children, and he left his family to make a better life, not only for himself, but then to send money back to his family in Italy, which he did until he passed away in his 90s. No matter where he worked, no matter where he lived, he always maintained his own vegetable garden.
Dion, tell me a bit about your family.
Yeah, my dad came over when he was a toddler, I think 2 years old, around 1930. And he came over with his mom and dad and siblings. And they were from southern Italy. They were from outside of Naples in a small region called Avellino. It was kind of a poorer rural countryside. They lived in the hillside there, and it was kind of poor. They came over and landed in Boston. The houses are very close together, side by side. The yards are postage stamp size yards. And yet still, I remember my grandfather's yard having, the fig trees, having lots of statuaries, religious statuaries in the back, and a grapevine that he had as well. And he had a full wine press in the basement. It was a beautiful wine press. So he had all these, the figs and the grapevines and yeah. So yeah.
That's such a classic Italian story, especially from our generation. We have those nostalgic memories of the wine press, the grape arbor. And, as I travel across the country, that's the classic story that people remember, and how different our lives have become from that. I mean, so vastly different. And I think that's where the nostalgia comes from, those feelings that lifestyle brought out in us, that sense of community, that sense of family, and making things with your own hands, creating the wine, making the tomato sauce. It's so vastly different from our lives now that I think is what I'm working to have people that weren't as lucky as we are to know that lifestyle, to make sure that they know it, especially Italian Americans, the future, the next generation, know the kinds of people they came from, the lifestyle that they came from. Is almost a responsibility to be the ones to share that, because not knowing that is really it really diminishes from your understanding of your culture.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when I can remember standing in the backyard of my grandfather's, house, and the fences between the yards were maybe, like, even for me, they were low, and I was like a young kid. They couldn't have been more than, like, for me, maybe chest high. So for a normal, adult, it was probably waist high for all the background. So you could see everyone's backyard all through, all down the road, and they were all similar. They were almost identical. And yet today, I think, there are 6 kids in my family alone, and we all have bigger yards, and only one of us has a fig tree in their backyard. So you're making me feel bad about, like, contributing to that loss.
Well, it's none of our faults. I mean, think about it. Our grandparents wanted nothing more for us than to go off and get an education. That meant everything to them, and become successful, not having to work the land so hard as them, making sure that we have food, and we don't want for the things that they wanted for. But I don't know if they would be happy how far from, we've come from their lifestyle, because they knew the value of living close to the land. They knew the value of community and interdependence with each other. And that's certainly not the typical American spirit. We're independent. We could do it ourselves. We have, we don't need everybody. We don't need anybody. But so we've come so far from that lifestyle, but, it's what they wanted for us, in a sense. So it's a mixed blessing. It's really a mixed blessing that
it was what they wanted. Because one of the things, I mean, like, you say that, and now it rings so true, because in my family, they didn't want any of the kids to speak Italian, or at least they, maybe they didn't. They wanted you to become American, right? So speaking Italian for the kids was, I think, secretly there was 2 parts to it. One is, you'll be American, so you don't need to speak Italian. And the other is, I think they wanted to have a language where they could talk and not have the kids understand.
Yeah,
So they could talk behind the
exactly.
kids' back, right?
That happened a
So
lot.
yeah. So there were those two parts to it. But, and that probably leads to the whole thing of like why my siblings, except for one, they don't have the fig trees. They don't have the grapevines. That doesn't really exist except for one of my sister who lives in Virginia, who, probably has a better climate for it too.
True, yeah.
So that leads us, being in the right climate, for both of you, how did your parents look after these fig trees in inhospitable climates? I mean, they had different ways of securing them in the winter, I think. Mary, tell me a little bit about your dad's approach.
Right. So, yeah, there's about as many ways to overwinter a fig tree as there are people that grow the trees. And that's one of the fascinating parts of my work, is that wherever I go, especially in the Northeast, even into any cold climate where, even into the Midwest where they're grown, they came up with ingenious ways to adapt these trees. Many would literally dig up most of the root balls and lie them down in a trench, almost so that it was like a shallow grave. And they would lie them down and then cover them with a piece of plywood so that they were completely buried for the winter. And that was one method. And then, of course, in the spring, that method, you just uprate the tree as soon as after the last frost, and then it actually produces fruit. And another method, which I, as a young teenager, wasn't too proud of, in my backyard, my grandfather would build these outhouse-looking structures around the trees so that it looked, the backyard was dotted with these very crudely made structures of course, he would never buy wood to do this. He would just use whatever old wood, old doors, old plywood. So you had these sort of crudely made little sheds around the tree each winter that would then be filled with leaves or straw, and then a covering would be put on top to protect it from the harsh winter. So that was his method.
Yeah,
About you, Dion?
my dad and my grandfather had two different ways of doing it. My grandfather used to actually bend over the fig tree and just bury the branches in the ground. And that was his method of doing it. And it apparently worked because he had them the next year a lot. My dad didn't bend them over. He wrapped them in like a mattress and then wrapped that kind of to brace it with like a big tin or aluminum barrel that would go over it. And that sounds like it would work better, but I remember my dad losing a lot of fig trees. So my grandfather's method might have been better. I don't know.
Well, that's true. They say, during the coldest winters, the ones that survive most often are the ones that are either buried completely under the ground or very close to the ground. I think it's that bit of passive heat from the ground that's then captured by however you cover the tree, even if it's not under the ground, it's still capturing. Whereas if they're wrapped standing upright, you don't have that passive warmth from the ground.
Are they pretty resilient, though, generally? I mean, I've been looking at some kind of pictures on a few websites where there seem to be some pretty sick-looking trees, and everyone's going, no, it's fine, doesn't matter that your relative watered them, didn't water them, drowned them, whatever, they'll be okay.
Yeah, I always say that fig trees were as resilient as the immigrants that brought them here. They brought them here, they adapted in a land not their own, they, survive under harsh conditions. It was just so symbolic of the immigrant experience. So that's why I love to use the fig tree as a symbol of who they were. But they are such a resilient tree. I have one stand of trees that was one of the ones that my grandfather had grown for years and years. Over 80 years he had grown this tree. So I have ones that I wrap every winter, but I have some of those that I just let die back every winter, and they just disappear. I mean, they all the top growth dies to the ground, but each spring and he's been gone over 30 years, each spring that tree resprouts in lots of different shoots. And from those shoots, I dig out new starts. So I just hack out some of those rooted starts, those little shoots that are coming up, and I make new fig trees out of them. So it's like the immigrants, I say, those gardeners, that they were not only resilient, but they were generous. I feel like fig trees are for sharing. He's still sharing those fig starts with me. For me, and as I travel the country, that's one of the most consistent things that happen is generosity. That when I go to these gardens to visit them, that more they can share, the happier they are. The more, I'm sure the more your Italian grandfather, Dion, could give you things from the garden, the happier he was.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That and a little bit of anisette.
Yeah. A little shot always makes the day better.
Exactly. But it's interesting you talk about the resilience of the trees, because that had to be a huge part of it, because I don't really remember any particular dishes that they made with the figs. Like, they didn't make anything with the figs. It was just figs. And they were figs on the table, and they were raw, and you just ate them. It wasn't like, the grapes make something or the tomatoes make something. It was like, here are figs. So it had to be that they were so resilient and they knew they could get something from them, because that's all you were getting. You weren't making dishes from them.
No, very, very few fig growers I visit eat them anything but fresh, right, warm from the tree. It's that taste, that fresh taste of a warm fig that is irresistible.
I think listening to you two talk, I've never done that. I have never picked a fig from a fig tree.
That's not uncommon. I mean, it's even in the U.S. I mean, so many, even Italian Americans, their only experience of figs are the fig Newton, the fig. That's a. I don't know if you have those in the UK, but this is a little cookie with a little bit of pasty touch of fig jelly, something in the center, which tastes nothing like figs. And more recently, people sometimes their only experience is figs from a store, like Whole Foods or a food chain, and they taste nothing like real figs. I don't know, Dion, if you can verify that, having eaten them fresh and then eaten them when maybe in California you can get good ones, but when they've been shipped from California and refrigerated and end up in a store for maybe a week, it's nothing like a fresh fig. So that's why all the work to maintain those trees was worth it, because that's about the only place those Italians could access figs unless they grew their own.
So the fruit is not prolific on those trees, I get the sense. They were not masses of figs. So would you just have gone and picked one from the tree, Mary, or was it something that you would wait for your father or your grandfather to say, now you can pick it?
Oh, absolutely. It was, there were so few, especially in the Northeast. I mean, they were sacred. It was almost the sacred fruit. And you didn't just go pick them. He was center stage when it came to the figs. And, he would go up, carefully test them, give them a little squeeze. Is that one right? And it was almost, it was almost a ritual. And he was the high priest of the fig or something. He would pick the fig and then pass them out to each of the kids. We got that one or two figs, with each visit. But and that's was what gave you the sense that this tree is so special, that, this reverence for this tree. And it was so special. And I loved figs, but I almost felt guilty eating them because I knew my father or everyone else loved them just as much. So I would never think of overeating, because I knew that how sacred these were and how special they were, that I would definitely defer, especially to my dad, who absolutely loved them.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we would go over every Sunday would be the time we lived about probably 15 minutes from my grandfather, a little bit further north outside of East Boston. And we would go every Sunday. Sunday would be like, Sunday dinner.
Sunday afternoon, yeah.
Yeah. And we would spend the whole day there. And there would be, I don't know, maybe 10 kids my age from different, aunts and uncles. And it would be a big deal if figs were on the table. There weren't many because he only had maybe 3 or 4 trees, right? The yard wasn't really that big, but it would be a big deal if you walked in and there were figs on the table, or it would be special, like he would bring them in and place them on the table. And you're right, like no one would instantly grab them. It would just be like, okay, let's see if we can get one. And the kids would share it. And I remember it would be mostly the adults who would be able to eat them, and the kids maybe get 1 or 2, but not very many in all. They'd all be split in half so that they, you wouldn't eat a whole one, of course. You'd just have a piece of it.
Right.
I love that. I love those memories. It's so lovely. So, Mary, how did the immigrants bring these fig trees to America? It wasn't like you could just pop down to the garden centre and buy one or order one online, was it?
Not at all. No, it's only recently, that they've been so widely available commercially. That's why I know, as I collect these trees across the country from, a backyard in Brooklyn, or like my grandfather's tree, almost all of these older trees came from Italy, came with them either tucked in, a little cutting tucked in one of their few belongings, one trunk or something. Or often, I hear stories about them cutting being sewn into the lining of a coat, because they weren't quite sure when they got here if it was going to be okay to bring these trees, even before there were any regulations. I'm talking about, prior to 1960s. They brought them very sort of secretively. I have a great oral history of a woman who was 102 at that time when I did the interview. Unfortunately, she's since passed, but she talked about her mother in like 1928 when they came on the old steamer, steamliners. This woman was a very young child, but she remembers her mother having sewn it into the hem of her skirt, a cutting. They got on the boat and she took it out of the hem of her skirt, put it in a little bit of water near a little window for the passage. And then when it was time to disembark from the boat, sewed it back into the lining of her skirt just to make sure it wasn't detected and taken from her, so that she could plant it. And fortunately, the woman, the 102-year-old woman, still had that tree that was grown by her mother and has shared it with my project as part of our legacy fig collection.
That's a beautiful story. The fact that the tree has survived. Tell me about your fig tree collection.
Right. It's called our Legacy Fig Tree Collection. And because of its importance of the fig tree to Italian American history, we really want to preserve these trees because each tree tells a story about who the immigrants were. So I recently got a grant to expand the collection and make sure that the collection can include almost every region of Italy, north to south, as many as we can include, and as many parts of the United States, so that we can demonstrate how prolific this tradition was, that no matter where the immigrants came from in Italy and no matter where they settled in the United States, that they often planted a fig tree. So that's my current project. And we're going to record then an oral history with each of these trees and then plant them in what we are going to call like a living fig tree museum, so that you can walk through this garden and look at the tree, scan a code on your phone, and then watch a video history of each of these trees. And we're planning one on the East Coast and looking for the appropriate site on the West Coast as well.
That is such a lovely idea.
You've inspired me to try and grow a fig tree in the clay that we call the land here.
You can do it. Your ancestors, I'm sure, did it.
That is such a lovely thought that you would grow a fig tree, Dion. I have no Italian in me, and I'm thinking I want to grow a fig tree. So,
yeah, right? That's so true. It's like you've inspired me to do it.
Good. That's my goal. That's what I do.
Because your parents still have a fig tree in their garden, Dion, is that right? They're in their 90s. They still have a fig tree?
They do. Yeah, they're both in their 90s, 93 and 94. They don't take care of it. They don't, handle it. My sister does. There's still one left, and it did come from my grandfather. So they took it when my grandfather passed. But it's now planted in their yard. Yeah, so it continues.
Dion, now you've inspired me. I may have to travel there and record that history of that tree. That's exactly, whether you know for sure or not that it came from Avellino, but that's history. That's the
Yeah,
history that we're trying to capture, because then we want other generations to know how rooted in the earth this culture was, so that they know that, it's part of their birthright to have a connection to the earth like this. And these fig trees are a great way to do that. So, yeah, we have to talk further about that tree.
Is it just Italians, or are there other nationalities as well for whom the fig tree is equally important?
Oh, yeah. That's what I love about it. I didn't realize, I thought this was sort of an Italian thing. I grew up with it, but I had an event to celebrate the fig called Fig Fest in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And, we celebrated all aspects of fig trees. We sold fig trees. We did fig pruning demonstrations. And I was so pleased that people from Lebanon, people from Syria, people from Turkey, Greek local residents, they came to the Fig Fest. And I learned so much about how valuable this tree is to so many cultures. And they also have this great nostalgia for this tree. And it's just beautiful. So I'd like to expand that and maybe celebrate Fig Fest, not only to be an Italian focused event, to really celebrate the fig tree and how important it is to so many cultures.
When's the next Fig Fest?
Well, there's a Fig Fest hopefully in 2023 in Pittsburgh, but I'd love to have one somewhere in New York, where we can really, really draw a larger crowd. And maybe in Boston, huh, Dion? We ought to have a
there you go.
Fig Fest in Boston for sure.
I'd fly back for that.
I'm going. If there's a Fig Fest, I'm going.
Good.
Can I just join in part of this with no Italian blood
Yes,
whatsoever and
yes.
never a fig tree anywhere in part of my life, but I just want to be part of it?
Oh, for sure, Sally. There's so much work when you put on an event like that. I'll put you right to work, both of you. And you can be definitely part of the fun.
Maybe there are other Fig Fests that we need to know about. I hope that this podcast may inspire some of us to have a go at growing the plants we feature in the stories. So every episode includes a how-to. Mary is our guide to taking fig tree cuttings, and I know we're in safe hands because she has clearly taken hundreds of cuttings from generous fig tree owners all over America. So first, find your fig tree.
You do want to work with it while it's not in active growth. So that would be either early spring or even late fall after it's lost its leaves.
How do I take a cutting? I have to ask permission first, presumably.
Right. As long as the owner is okay with you just taking a small branch of the tree, you just go to the end of a branch that's a little more than pencil width. So you don't want one that's really large and thick a branch, nor do you want a really little spindly one, but larger than pencil width. And from the end of the branch, you go, make sure you've taken 2 nodes where the leaf would be coming out. Make sure you get 2 nodes. So a little space on top, then the 2 nodes, a little space on the bottom, and then cut it at an angle. And if you go down, you can continue to take cuttings, but make sure you know which is top and bottom. Mark it really well so that you're not planting it eventually upside down. I mean, the first cutting you'll know because it's the end with maybe a little leaf sprouting, but cuttings further down have to be carefully marked so that you aren't cutting upside down into the soil.
So I've got my cutting. I'm holding my cutting in hand. Now what do I do? Do I have to be quick?
Well, I wouldn't let it dry out, but if it's an hour or so before you get to work with it and to plant it, just a damp piece of paper, a damp newspaper, damp paper towel, wrapping it, and to keep it just a bit moist would be good. And then you want to get it to root it. There's numerous ways to do it. You can just put the whole cutting in a bag, a baggie. I never know these words. Ziploc bag, is that a UK saying? But it's a bag, a little plastic bag with a sealed top with some kind of really light soil medium that would help it sprout in. And you just dampen it very lightly, but put it in a sort of a semi-dark space, but somewhat warm. Some people put them on the tops of their refrigerator and just let them go up to 4 weeks or so. You'll be able to see if the little white hair-like roots are sprouting through the clear plastic bag. You can also just get some also light soil in a pot, and you just put the cutting almost halfway up. One of the nodes can be covered, and then you would make a little greenhouse out of it, cover the whole pot and cutting with a plastic bag, and then secure it maybe with a rubber band around the pot. So you've created a moist area. As long as they don't dry out, that's the fear of losing your cutting, is if you've allowed it to get too dry. You don't want it too moist and wet, so whatever soil can't be too damp, but you do want to keep the cutting moist until it's really sprouts and is ready to grow outside or in a pot in the house.
And how long do you reckon that will take?
If that cutting is going to be successful, you'll know within several weeks if it's starting to come to life in any way, if the little hair-like roots are starting to grow through the plastic bag, if it's in the soil in the sealed plastic bag, or if it's in the pot. It should start leafing out, showing a sign of buds at the top after several weeks. But even after several weeks, I never give up on a fig tree. I've kept trees and just nurtured them along for months, and they'll surprise you sometimes, and they'll come to life when you didn't expect it. So I would definitely keep it going for several months and keep an eye on it.
And I'm taking this cutting before the parent fig tree is in leaf, basically. I'm taking it when the parent is dormant.
Exactly. Yes. When the parent is has lost its leaves, has had some very cool weather, so that we know that it's not in active growth, and taking the cutting from there.
And do they grow happily in a pot as well as in the garden?
Fig trees can be grown definitely in pots and can be very successful. Some people swear that in the Northeast, that's the only way you should grow a fig tree, that it's too much work that to grow it in the ground and then do all the work that it takes to keep it going. So some people just prefer pots, and they're never going to grow as large in a pot. Well, unless you. Because then the pot, if you want to grow the tree large, the pot just gets too big and heavy to move around. When you plant them in a pot, they do need to be fertilized, where in-ground trees don't really need fertilized. They actually sort of prefer a soil that isn't too fertile in the ground.
And how long before I might get my first fig?
Yeah, so if you grew it from a cutting, and it was growing healthy and growing, you're fertilizing it, keeping it well watered. In 2 years, if you're really lucky and you have a really green thumb, you might get 1 or 2 figs. Often those 1 or 2 figs, they grow and you get very excited and you think, oh, I'm going to have my first figs. But they don't, produce a mature fruit. They don't last all the way to maturity. Then they fall off. But, there's a chance you might get one after 2 years or 3 years. By year 4, you should be getting your fun first little crop.
I've just got to find somebody with a fig tree, basically, haven't I? And just see. But you say that what I love about gardeners is they tend to be, they are incredibly generous.
Exactly.
And I guess the good thing about taking a cutting from a fig tree somewhere near to where you live is that that fig tree has survived in that area. It's a fig tree that's producing figs. It's happy there, as opposed to buying one that may not be happy where you are.
Exactly. You know that that's adapted to your climate and that it can be successful, because there's so many varieties of fig trees and so many that don't do as well in certain climates. And you can never really start one from a seed. That's one thing to know about fig trees. They're almost impossible to grow true to the parent. by seed alone, that they have to be propagated either from a cutting or from a rooted start if you want that actual tree.
And the rooted stock is when you bend a branch down and you cover it in soil, and then that will start to root from where that part of the branch is beneath the soil.
Yes, that's one method. Or if you have a friend that's growing it in bush form, allowing multiple stems to grow and not training it into a single trunk, because it wants to grow in multiple stems in a bush. So if you have a friend that's grown it in multiple stems and is willing to let you hack out one of those stems and just make sure you get a little bit of the root, even a few of those root hairs, as long as it's have an inch or two of the trunk that's been under the ground with a few of the root hairs, that most likely will start as well. And you won't do damage to your friend's tree if you if they just share one little rooted start with you.
Dion, you and I have got to do this.
Well, my one question was, what's the water requirements? Being in San Diego, water is always an issue.
Exactly.
So what are the water requirements for it? Does it require a lot to start?
To in-ground tree, of course, if you had it in a pot, you'd be watering it probably every day there. But an in-ground tree, you would have to keep it fairly consistently watered for the first couple of years. I mean, you wouldn't really want it to dry out. But once a tree is rooted in San Diego, it's going to be fine. I mean, I think, it thrives in hot, dry climates. Fig trees, I mean, southern Italy is very similar, Calabria and Puglia, and they are quite happy there. So if you could just spare that water for the first couple of years to keep it, to give it a good start, I think you'll be quite happy at a pretty drought-tolerant tree for the rest of its life.
All right, Sally, it's a challenge.
It is. I've got to go and find someone who's got a fig tree. I don't actually know anyone who's got one. You've obviously got your grandparents' fig tree, so you're in there basically.
Somehow I need to get it from Boston to San Diego and keep it moist before.
Well, there you go. I'm sure it'll make the passage.
So you need a sibling either who's going to sew it into the hem of their skirt. Actually, you don't need to going across America, do you? Or what Mary didn't mention, which she mentioned to me before, was the potato trick, isn't it? Where you stick it in a potato.
Right. I've heard that one. Yeah. A lot of immigrants brought it, just the cutting, a potato, cut a hole in the potato, stuck the stem in there to keep it moist, and then brought it that way. So you could do that. You could do that one, Dion. Would work for you.
It's a challenge. You're on. Yes. I'll let you know when I can find someone who's got a fig tree that I can take a cutting from. Head over to the website where you can find the link to the Italian Garden Project, where there are loads of wonderful stories. Maybe there's a plant in your family that holds special memories that you'd like to find out more about and perhaps grow in your own garden. Perhaps this podcast can help. Do get in touch via ourplantstories.com. I'd love to hear your story and look for the connections across continents, across history and across gardens. Our Plant Stories is produced and presented by me, Sally Flatman. And if you've enjoyed this plant journey, please do tell your friends and fellow gardeners about this podcast and share it so we can grow our Plant Stories community. I really do believe that word of mouth is one of the best ways to share something like this. And if you know someone who you think would like it, but they're not yet listening to podcasts, well, there's a really simple how-to on the website. So Mary said, fig trees are for sharing. I'm hoping the owner of this fig tree near the tube station feels the same way, because I've plucked up the courage to come and ask. I'll let you know on the website what happens. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website, ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.